The clock struck 11:58 p.m. when I crossed the gates of the old cemetery. It wasn't the first time I had heard rumors about it in the village. They said that if you wrote your darkest wish on a piece of paper and burned it on the altar of the abandoned crypt, he himself would appear to negotiate with you. I never believed in such things, but that night I was desperate. I had debts drowning me, a marriage in ruins, and a job that exploited me. I had lost everything I once cared about, and the emptiness I felt drove me to do the unthinkable. I carried a black candle, a lighter, and a piece of paper in my pocket where I had written in red ink what I desired the most. I want my life to change completely at any cost. When I reached the altar, I knew something was wrong. The crypt seemed to breathe. I could feel the heavy, cold air around me as if the place was waiting for me. I lit the candle with trembling hands and placed the paper on the stone slab. As I set it on fire, the smoke began to rise, but instead of dispersing, it gathered into a shape that made me step back. The smoke took the form of a humanoid figure, with eyes red as embers and a smile that could not be human. "Did you call me?" it asked, its voice resonating in my head like an echo repeating in my own thoughts. I felt paralyzed, as if my body was frozen in fear. But for some reason my voice responded. "I want a new life. I want to stop being a failure." The being tilted its head and let out a laugh that shook the ground. "At what price, mortal? Everything has a cost." Right then I understood. I wasn't negotiating with just any being. This was him, the one. Without thinking too much, I replied, "Anything, whatever you want, but I want my life to change." The being's eyes glowed intensely, and before I could react, it extended a hand. Out of nowhere, a contract appeared, written in a language I didn't recognize. "Just sign here." The silence surrounding the crypt was absolute, so oppressive that even the creak of my fingers taking the pen sounded like thunder in my mind. The contract was made of a strange material, neither paper nor cloth, and the letters glowed with a crimson color that seemed to move like fresh blood. "What's happening?" he asked with a mocking smile, as if he could smell my doubts. "No," I replied. My hand wavered as I held the pen. Something inside me screamed to stop, but desperation was stronger than fear. I was willing to do anything. "Doubt now, mortal?" His tone turned grave. "This is a path with no return. If you sign, you won't be able to turn back, but if you don't, your misery will continue until it consumes you." My eyes met his, and something in his gaze made me feel naked, vulnerable, as if he could see every dark corner of my soul. He knew exactly why I was there. Finally, I took a deep breath and signed. The pen left a dark trail on the contract, as if I were writing with my own shadow. When I finished, the paper ignited with black flames and disappeared, leaving a pungent odor in the air. "Now," he said with a smile revealing rows of teeth too sharp, "enjoy your new life." Before I could ask what that meant, everything around me darkened. It wasn't just the lack of light, it was as if the whole world had ceased to exist. In that absolute darkness, I heard a chorus of whispers, intertwined voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand but somehow felt deep within me. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the crypt. I found myself in a house I didn't recognize but that seemed to be mine. A pristine, luxurious place, with furniture surely worth more than I had ever earned in my life. In the living room there was a photo of me hanging on the wall, but it wasn't the defeated man I remembered. In the picture, I was dressed in an expensive suit. My smile was broad and confident. It was another version of me, a successful one. As I explored the house, everything seemed perfect. Designer clothes in the closet, a sports car in the garage, and a bank account with a number of zeros I had never imagined. But then something strange began to happen. A series of memories that weren't mine started to invade my mind. Images of important meetings, contract signings, a life I hadn't lived but now felt like my own. "This is what you wanted, right?" His voice echoed, though I couldn't see him. "What's happening?" I shouted, but my voice sounded strange, as if it weren't entirely mine. "It's your new life. But, as I told you, everything has a price." The ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, and suddenly, I saw shadows moving in the corners of the house. They didn't seem human, but I couldn't identify what they were. I only knew they were there watching me. The first night in that house was hell. Every time I turned off the lights, I felt a presence next to me, shadows whispering my name, red eyes spying on me from the darkness, but at dawn, everything disappeared as if it had been a bad dream. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my new life, but the more I did, the more evident the signs became that something was wrong. The people around me treated me as if they had known me forever, but in their eyes, there was something strange, as if they weren't really there. Then one night I heard the sound, a dry, constant thump coming from the basement. I didn't remember having a basement, but something compelled me to go down. When I opened the door and turned on the light, I saw it. A staircase that seemed to descend beyond what could physically be possible, leading to a black abyss that seemed to call my name. Something was waiting for me down there. The cold air of the basement wrapped around me as I descended the stairs, and with each step, the thumping sound grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't stop descending. Something inside me told me I had to face whatever was waiting below. When I reached the last step, the darkness enveloped me completely. I gritted my teeth and stepped forward hesitantly, searching for the light switch. When I finally found it and the light illuminated the space, I saw a scene I could never have imagined. The basement wasn't just a simple room, it was filled with strange objects, relics, carved wooden figures and old photographs hanging from the walls. Each photo showed a different version of me at various moments in life, in places I had never visited. But the worst part wasn't the images. No, the worst part was the presence I felt, that sensation of being watched not just by the shadows on the walls, but by something much closer. And then I saw it. In a corner, just where the human eye cannot look without effort, a figure stood, draped in what seemed to be a black cloak with a white porcelain mask. Its mere presence froze the blood in my veins. I approached, unable to retreat. My body moved as if it were no longer under my control. The figure remained motionless. Its empty eyes watched me from behind the mask. At that moment, I knew I shouldn't get any closer. Yet I couldn't stop myself. Each step brought me closer to that entity, as if an invisible force was dragging me toward it. My breath became harder, as if the air was thickening, heavier, and a feeling of despair flooded me. What was this thing? What did it want from me? Suddenly, the figure took a step toward me, and in that instant, everything vanished. I was no longer in the basement. I was back in the crypt, right where I had signed the contract. The black candle was still burning, and it, standing before me, smiled with a sickening satisfaction. "Do you like your new life, mortal?" it asked. Its voice was like a distant echo reverberating in my head. I tried to speak, but I couldn't. The feeling of terror kept me frozen. Remember, everything has a price. Every wish, every longing that you and others desire has already been paid for in some way. Not everything you've gained is truly yours. It was then that I understood. The figure in the basement wasn't just a relic of the past. It was the result of my wish, something I hadn't considered in that moment of desperation. The figure I had seen in the darkness of the basement was a manifestation of my own fears, created by the promise of a change that was impossible without consequences. That figure represented what my life would become if I didn't fulfill the pact. A void, a soulless existence. I tried to take a step back, but the floor seemed to trap my feet, as if it were thick mud preventing me from moving. The crypt began to close around me, the walls tightening, and all I could hear was its laughter. A deep, rumbling laugh that made my insides twist. Finally, my body reacted and I ran, but when I turned to look back at the crypt, it was no longer there. I was in my house, in the same mansion that had become my gilded prison. However, the sense of evil had taken over everything, as if something dark was seeping through the cracks of the place. I couldn't escape the feeling that, no matter how hard I tried, everything I had done was tied to a fate much greater than mine. The shadows in the house moved on their own, the whispers echoed again in my ears, and the figure from the basement began to appear more and more clearly, closer and closer. I no longer knew what was real and what was not. But what I did know was that my soul no longer belonged to me. It all began one stormy night, one of those nights when the sky seems furious with the earth. I had left work late, and as I crossed the park near my house, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. A man dressed in black, sitting under a dead tree. It didn't make sense. The tree was dry, surrounded by others that were completely alive, and he remained still as if he didn't care about getting wet. I tried to ignore him, but something in his presence made me stop. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the faint glow of a lit cigarette. That's when he spoke. His voice wasn't normal. It was deep, resonating as if it came from a much deeper place than his throat. "You've got problems, don't you?" he said without looking directly at me. I didn't respond immediately. How could I know? My life was not exactly a disaster. But I had struggled for years to achieve some stability. The promotion at work never came, debts kept chasing me, and each day seemed harder than the one before. "Sit down," he said. All night, without thinking too much, I did. It was as if my body acted on its own. I sat in front of him, the cold of the floor seeping through my clothes, and then I saw his eyes. They were completely black, like two abysses that swallowed me. "I know what you need, I know what you want, and I can give it to you. But nothing is free." My first reaction was to laugh, thinking he was just some crazy person, but as I did, the air around me changed. Suddenly, the sound of the storm disappeared, The park darkened even more,